Thank you, Denise. I'm just going to start sharing my screen. Now, as Jim mentioned, I'd like everybody just to put their comments in the chat as we go along, and then we can answer them at the end. I'm happy, this presentation will take for about an hour, so I'm happy to stay on for longer if there is anybody who has more questions. Otherwise, we will wrap it up, but please ask any questions in the comments box. Can I just do a quick check to make sure everybody can actually see my PowerPoint presentation, effective evaluations? Excellent. So, do you love giving evaluations? Do you volunteer in your club to do them? I'm going to show you today why evaluations are critical in the Toastmasters journey, how to give an effective evaluation, and we're going to have fun while we do it. I'm going to be focusing more on verbal evaluations today. However, the principles for written evaluation are pretty much the same. So what am I going to cover? We're going to talk about why evaluations are important, what is an effective evaluation, how do we give an effective speech evaluation. I'll touch very briefly on whether giving an evaluation for a contest is different to that in a club meeting. And then, thanks to Michael Nellis, we're going to get a little bit of practice on evaluating. Then, as I said, there'll be questions at the end. So let's kick it off. Why are evaluations important? The main purpose of an evaluation is to support, help, and encourage the speaker. But becoming a better evaluator in Toastmasters will also help us in other parts of our lives. For example, if you think about it, a work performance review is really just an evaluation. And first impressions matter. If you and your members provide useful and encouraging evaluations, then your club is going to leave a positive and lasting impression on visitors because they'll see that your club is a place to grow and they'll want to join. So what is an effective evaluation? Effective evaluation encourages and inspires the speakers by giving constructive feedback. Constructive feedback can boost a speaker's confidence and motivate them to continue to improve. But likewise, a badly performed evaluation can demoralize somebody. It can actually make them never want to speak again. And I unfortunately have seen some evaluations that have just been nothing short sometimes of cruel. But that's at one extreme. But at the other extreme as well, if our evaluations are just full of positive things, then a speaker may walk away thinking, well, how am I going to grow from this? Because people are only telling me what I'm good at. That effective evaluation also gives positive reinforcement, so supportive commentary to reinforce positive speaking behaviours. And most importantly, it's about giving specific suggestions, telling the speaker exactly what areas they need to work on. As I said, I've seen some evaluations just go too far into the strengths part of it. And evaluations are about educating. And if we are only focusing on strengths, then nobody is going to learn how to be a better speaker. It's not only the speaker who benefits from a good evaluation. The evaluator benefits as well, because the more evaluations we do, it helps us to understand what works in a speech and why. So we can become better speakers because we're firsthand learning and evaluating others. But the audience benefits as well, because the tips and hints that you give as evaluator will help the audience. And they'll also learn from the good example of a good evaluator. So now let's get into the meat of it. How do we give an effective evaluation? I'm going to go through a suggested step-by-step approach. First of all, evaluations start before the actual speech. If you know you're going to be an evaluator in your club, reach out to who you're going to be evaluating and ask them, what are the objectives of their project? Ask them, are there any other things that they'd like you to focus on? So for example, a speaker might say, I'm always getting feedback that I don't pause enough or I use too many ums and ahs. I'd like you to focus on that in your evaluation. Use the project evaluation sheet or the generic evaluation sheet, which I'll go through shortly. And look, but I often sometimes find it's easier to not to use the sheet while I'm taking notes during the speech, but just to have a single sheet of paper. I draw a line down the middle. I have positive things, that is things the speaker's doing well on one side, and things for them to improve on the right. So I find that easier when I'm just trying to take notes. Then during the speech, while you're listening to the speech, try to focus on those objectives that you know the speaker is working on. Yes, it's important to take notes, but don't do it at the expense of the speech, because you're part of the audience and you want to also enjoy the speech. Also look for the audience reaction. So what are the audience doing? Are they laughing? Do they look interested? And then what is your reaction? How did the speech make you feel? Preparing and giving the evaluation. I'm going to step through some of this in a little bit more detail shortly, but just a very quickly overview. And don't forget, an evaluation in itself is a speech. I'm going to talk about the method I use, which is the sandwich method. But most importantly, and you'll hear me say this a couple of times, an evaluation has to give specific and meaningful suggestions. And then after the speech, yes, we fill out the evaluation form and we give it back to the speaker, but take that extra step to actually ask the speaker, do you have any questions about the feedback I gave you? Is there anything you'd like more information on? So now let's look at a little bit more detail about preparing and giving the evaluation, because this is what you'll get a chance to practice shortly. So as I mentioned, an evaluation is a speech. It has to have a beginning, a middle, and a conclusion. And don't forget to summarize your key points. Don't try and cover everything, particularly not in the verbal evaluation. Just pick out a couple of things. We've probably all heard evaluations that are what seems to me like a shopping list, where they'll say, oh, your eye contact was good and your vocal variety was good, but you need to pause more. There's just a shopping list of all these different things, but nothing is covered in any sort of detail. So don't try and cover everything, because you've got your written evaluation form. You can write as much as you want there, but in the verbal evaluation, keep it brief. As I mentioned, I use the sandwich method. So this is where the positive feedback, or sorry, the suggestions for improvement are sandwiched between the positive feedback. So I start with a very short introduction, then I give 2 commendations. These are the things that the speaker did well. Then I talk about 2 suggestions for improvement, and then I end on the strongest benefit, the strongest thing that the speaker did. So I always end on a high, and then most importantly, I summarize those key points, and then I have a very short conclusion. And I try very hard not to do what everybody else does in the conclusion, which is say, oh, thank you for your speech, it was great. Try to end on something more inspirational, because the whole point of an evaluation is to really encourage and motivate the speaker as well as the audience. Regardless of the method you use, and there are a few methods, you don't have to use the sandwich method, that's just the one that I prefer. But whatever method you use, your evaluations have to be specific and meaningful. So use specific examples from the speech. For example, you could say, when the speaker did this, I thought that. When the speaker said this, I realized that he was really passionate about his topic. So use specific examples from the speech. In your commendations and suggestions for improvement, try to pick a few things from both content, which is things like the speech structure, and delivery, so eye contact, vocal variety, etc. And that's because both the content and the delivery are important in a speaker's development. A speaker could have the most fantastic hand gestures and eye contact and vocal variety, but if the speech isn't well structured, their meaning's going to be lost. So both are important. And challenge yourself to really dig deeper. Go beyond the standard vocal variety, eye contact, pause, and look for other things in the speaker's speech. Dig deeper. One way of doing this is to always ask yourself, so what? Why are you giving this feedback? For example, John used appropriate hand gestures. So what? Well, he ticked the points off on his fingers, and that helped me to follow his speech and understand the points he was making. The second example, Jane started her speech with a question. So what? The question grabbed my attention and made me want to hear more. So every time you give a statement, think about, so what? Why am I giving this particular piece of feedback? And what do I want the speaker to do with it? Now it's your turn. Before we hand over to Michael, let's just have a quick look at a couple of statements. Statement number 1 is, I noticed John didn't make eye contact. Statement number 2 is, Mary's speech needs a better opening. Who'd like to do statement 1? How could we make this statement more specific and meaningful for John? Does anybody want to give it a go? You can just unmute yourself. Denise, I can see your hand up.
Yes. John spoke to one side of the room. If he had actually moved his head and looked at the other side, he would have engaged the whole room. Because he wasn't looking at them, it didn't get their attention.
Perfect. What about the next one, about Mary's speech opening being better? Does anybody, I can't quite see everybody in this view. So does anybody, if anybody, just unmute yourself and sing out. You go, Robert.
I felt that Mary's speech could have had a better opening, as a strong introduction is a hook to bring us into the speech. The use of a quote or a song title can capture our attention and bring us along as she goes through her story.
Perfect. Perfect. So hopefully everybody can see how much more meaningful that kind of feedback is, rather than just a statement about eye contact or speech opening. So a couple of other examples for the eye contact one, I suggest John could try to keep looking at the audience and not look down when he's thinking about his next point. Mary opened her speech with the statement about X, but what if she'd opened her speech with her story about ABC? That would have really grabbed my attention. So it doesn't have to be much, like even in the statements that Denise and Robert just did, there was only probably 1 or 2 sentences there. So it's not about talking for half a minute. It's just about taking that one little step further and trying to make your statements really specific and meaningful. Some more tips to take your evaluations to the next level. Use I language when you're given an evaluation. Remember, this is your opinion. It's not necessarily the audience's opinion. So say things like, I believe, I suggest. It's okay to still point out the audience's reactions if you think it's appropriate. So you could say, when John was talking about his trip into the jungle, I was enthralled. And I looked at the rest of the audience and it seemed to me that they couldn't take their eyes off him either. But it's still your opinion. Another tip is to refer to the speaker in third person. So don't say your eye contact, what wasn't needed to be improved, or you needed to have better vocal variety. Speak about them in the third person. So Mary's eye contact, Mary's vocal variety. And this helps the speaker, because the speaker doesn't feel, particularly for newer speakers, it doesn't make them feel quite so intimidated as when an evaluator's standing there saying you. But also remember what we were talking about at the beginning. Evaluation is just as much for the audience as it is for the speaker. So by talking about people in third person, that just helps the audience as well to realize that this is an educational presentation for them. One tip I find it helpful, is to give the evaluation as if the speaker is going to give that same speech again. Because this helps me to then focus on very specific aspects of the speech. I think about, well, how could the speaker improve this particular speech next time? What worked? What would I suggest they leave in? Or are there things that perhaps aren't working in the speech and that they might need to take out? So for example, if their speech is over time, you might suggest I think you should take out this part because then your speech would flow better. So that's one little tip. It just helps me sometimes really focus in on the key aspects of that speech. One question I do get a lot is, well, how do I evaluate a speaker who's better or more experienced than I am? I'm only a novice evaluator, and here I'm expected to evaluate people who've been in Toastmasters 10 years. Well, my response to that is there is no speech or speaker who is perfect. No one is perfect. And even they may have done something really well, but think about how they could make it even better. For example, you could say, Anne used lots of pauses in her speech, which helped it to flow. However, when she said X, Y, Z, she didn't pause. And I thought that was a really important point. And I think she lost that point because she didn't pause at that point. So her pauses were good, but she could make them even better. And evaluating more experienced speakers helps us to become better evaluators and speakers because it makes us dig deeper to find something to suggest for an improvement. And by doing that, we not only become better evaluators, but we also become better speakers because we start to learn what makes a good speech. Why did this speech work and this speech didn't? Is given an evaluation for a contest different to a club meeting? There's going to be an evaluation on this at a session on this at the District 69 conference in May. So there's going to be a couple of past champions who will actually be talking about how to do a speech contest evaluation. But just very briefly, any speech contest takes us to the next level. It doesn't matter what category it is, whether it's international evaluation, it takes us to the next level because it forces us to dig deeper. The purpose is exactly the same. It's to help speakers improve. I find that to do well in an evaluation contest, though, you have to go beyond the superficial. You have to find something that the other contestants won't. So you're not going to win a speech contest if all you talk about is vocal variety and pausing. I still use the sandwich technique. I find it works just as well in a club evaluation as it does in a contest evaluation, because it's even more important in a contest to keep to time. So I find that by sticking to those few points, the 3 things that they did well, the 2 things to suggest for improvement, I can keep within that 2 to 3 minute period, but also I can dig a little bit deeper and do more analysis than I could if I tried to cover 10 things. So now it's crunch time. Now we're going to evaluate. So I'm going to introduce Michael Nellis now, who is our test speaker. And then what we're going to do is, while Michael is giving his speech, I'd like you just to think about what his positive things are and what things you think you would suggest for improvement. As part of his introduction, I am going to tell you what the objective of his speech is. So there's a little clue as to one of the things you might like to focus on. Then while that's happening, I will just drop into the comments box a generic evaluation form, because we will then go through that when Michael has done his speech. So Michael Nellis has been a Toastmaster for over 30 years. He's a founding member of Goal Setters in Brisbane and a new member of the 111 Club. He was Area Director for Area 21 in 2002 and has held many roles at the club level. Today, his speech is titled Mentor Coaching, Best of Both Worlds, and the objective of his speech is to motivate all members to fire up their Toastmasters growth using a mentor or coach. This is a 5 to 7 minute speech, so there'll be a green on 5, amber on 6, red on 7, and it comes from the effective coaching pathway. So please welcome Michael with his speech titled Mentor/Coaching, Best of Both Worlds. And I'll just stop sharing my screen. Over to you, Michael. You're on mute, Michael. You're on mute.
Thanks very much, Suzanne, and hi, everyone. I can see we've all got hardcore Toastmasters here today, not too many newbies, most likely, which is great. So I'm sure you've already got some feel for the importance of mentoring and coaching. You probably, some of you are mentors, and some of you may be take a coach approach to your support of other members. And as Suzanne said, I've been in Toastmasters a while, and to me, it was one of the coach mentoring is one of the most valuable support dynamics of Toastmasters, both having as a newbie to be mentored by a former area governor, Noel Cummings, and then to be trained as a life coach for 10 years and being active in that, and also applying my coaching skills as the mentor program coordinator in my club goal setters. So today I'd like to cover three things. First of all, what the difference is between coaching and mentoring. I'd also like to talk about, but pretty obvious, why it's important to have one. And thirdly, is to stress the importance of being proactive, that it only works if you actually take your part in being an active coachee, or as Toastmasters calls it, a protege. So the difference between coaching and mentoring. Now, coaching means different things to different people in the workplace. It means one thing as opposed to on the sports field, where coaching means another thing. But really, a coach is someone who jogs alongside you while you develop a skill, whether it's communication and leadership, or whether it's Olympic fitness. A coach's particular focus is to challenge the coachee or mentee to be very clear about what their goals are and to help them achieve them. It's not to be their rev up merchant, because the idea is that you explain a process for focusing on your goals and achieving them, so that that person can then apply them even when you're no longer coaching. I guess mentoring in the traditional sense, whether it's particularly in Toastmasters, it's where an experienced Toastmaster gives a lesser experienced Toastmaster the benefit of that experience. It can be proactive, but traditionally I think it's been somewhat reactive, where the new person basically had to ask the mentor for support or ask them questions. Actually, in pathways, I'm doing the effective coaching pathway. It defines the difference as coaching is to focus on one particular skill. So it's a short-term activity. For instance, you might say to your coach, I want to get better at impromptu speaking. Whereas in Toastmasters, mentoring is an ongoing, longer-term relationship that looks at all the dynamics of improvement. So why is it so important to have a coach or mentor? Now, looking at my audience, I know there's a lot of experienced people like Robert, and you've been area or division directors. How many people have a mentor or a coach? 1, 2, 3? Well, that's pretty good. And I guess the difficult question is, how active is that relationship? You know, are you working with that person to help you focus on your goals and check in and challenge you to just keep on improving? It's so easy when you become experienced to be out there giving. You might either be in a role or you're doing a lot of mentoring for others and find that there's very little time or inclination to actually check in with even an equal. And goal setters, we call them buddies rather than mentors, because you're just supporting each other to be your best. But the important thing is about a coach or mentor helps you focus on your goals and helps you achieve them. We all would like to think we want to spend a lot of time on Toastmasters, but by the time we've done our work, attended to family needs, chores, Netflix, we really find there's hardly time to prepare speeches or for roles. And How many people have find themselves preparing their speech on the way into work with a meeting on that day, or preparing it in the lift, writing down some dot points on the back of a business card? So again, the purpose of a coach mentor is really to help you prioritize your desire for being a better speaker above all the other things you feel you have to do. So we all know, or many of us have experienced having a mentor, but the question is, how do we get proactive? Because especially with a coach, the idea isn't they're not some electric charger who you plug into to get you really fired up about Toastmasters again. As I said before, a coach is someone who jogs alongside you. You've got the motivation to be a better speaker, and your coach or mentor is jogging alongside saying, how are you going? What are your goals? And encouraging you and recognizing you for what you've achieved. Again, the rhetorical question is, how many of you actually have clear written goals for your Toastmasters journey? I know you're all experienced, so it's so easy to think, oh yeah, that's all theoretical palaver. So the question is, unless they're actually, the litmus test for goals is, if I asked you now, what are your 3 top goals? Could you tell me them without searching for the bit of paper or looking for the business card in your wallet? So what I encourage you to think about is, how are you going to be a better coach or mentor? When do you actually catch up with your mentee or protege, especially in this difficult climate of Zoom, where we can all just close the meeting and wander off and do our thing? So what opportunities are you making to catch up with your mentee? Is it over coffee? Is it a separate Zoom session? Or is it a phone chat thereafter? But without that resolve and without that clarity, like all good intentions, it just evaporates. I know that I've got so much out of mentoring and being mentored, and I just challenge you to, if you are a mentor or a coach, to take that role seriously enough so that the people you are supporting really get a benefit, and you'll get that benefit too. So I'd love to hear sometime about war stories about how you changed someone's life and how your life was changed a bit. I know I've been working with a couple of goal setters, and it's been an absolute thrill to see them improve and also be challenged by a coach myself. Madam Evaluation Educational Presenter.
Thank you very much, Michael. That was something different, I think, and certainly something to get us all thinking. Now, can everybody see in your chat, in the comments, I've just dropped in a document. It's just the generic evaluation form. Let me know if you can't see it. And you can open it, okay? Okay, so one of the things I just briefly wanted to talk about before I'm then going to ask for a volunteer is there anybody who would like to give a 2 to 3 minute evaluation based upon the sorts of things that we've talked about, or even some other technique that you prefer? So think about that, think about who might be ready to do that. But what I've got here is just the generic evaluation form. So this one can be used pretty much for any project or any other type of speech that somebody is giving. What I'd like to know is how many people feel really clear, or how many people have filled out an evaluation form under Pathways, whether it's the specific one or the generic one, and how many people feel that the number system is pretty straightforward. They can easily pick what a 5 is, easily pick what the 3 is. Does everybody feel fairly comfortable with that? I can see some nods. Yeah. I think the thing is, the numbers themselves, I don't think matter that much. I think what we want to focus on is what sort of feedback are we giving somebody. So, for example, with vocal variety, number 5 is perfect. Number 1 is ineffective. But there are some words here that would be useful to use in an evaluation. So it talks about using tone, speed, and volume. But again, what I wouldn't say in an evaluation is, oh, your tone, speed, and volume was a 3, or your tone, speed, and volume needs work, because that's not specific. This is just a guide. If I was going to talk about vocal variety, I would say something like, you know, your tone, speed, and volume was effective because when you said this in your speech, your voice got quieter, and that made me lean forward to try to hear what you were saying, and I was really keen to hear it. Or when you really spoke loudly, I almost jumped out of my seat, but it was so exciting because you were talking about your trip through the jungle, and you really brought it to life. So even when you're using a form like this and you're giving people numbers, still think about whether it's a written evaluation, so on this form, or whether it's a verbal evaluation, using specific examples from the speech, so that when you tell somebody that their vocal variety is effective or their eye contact was good, but they actually understand what that means, and they can take it away, both the things that they did well, so they can continue to work on that because that's good, and the things that they need to improve on. So who would like to have a go at giving a short evaluation? It doesn't have to be 2 to 3 minutes. It doesn't have to be, doesn't have to be polished. If not, I'm going to call upon somebody and oh no, Judith, excellent. You're on mute.
Thank you. My evaluations are my pet hate, so I'm going to have a go.
Perfect. Now, just before you start, could I ask Denise or Jim just to time it, please, for 2 to 3 minutes?
Thank you.
No problem.
Our speaker today gave a speech about mentoring and coaching and the difference thereof. I got a little lost in the beginning of the speech because I wasn't sure whether it was a preamble to the speech or the speaker had started speaking. I particularly liked the analogy of the coach jogging alongside the person that he was coaching. I could see that happening, and I could see that in my life when I'm coaching someone or they've been coaching me. I thought that was a lovely word picture there. I liked the part where you talked about the coach's skills, and I'd like to see, you said something about prioritising time management, which I think is really important in this day and lifestyles that we live. We do need to prioritise and have our goals set, and to be proactive as a mentor. Don't leave it to the mentee to pick up the phone and say, hey, I need help. I really believe in mentoring, and as a mentor, we need to pick up the phone and say, what can I do for you? What do you need? What are your goals right now? How can we help you? Can we meet up for coffee? And those kinds of questions we need. So a mentor needs to be proactive, and we really need to get out there and become better at that. And I love the clear written goals, have a top 3 goals, and I think that's really important. So thank you to the speaker today for giving me those couple of points for improvement. Thank you. Back to you, Madam Toastmaster.
Thank you, Judith. And it just comes down to practice. That's all. It doesn't matter whether it's a speech, a table topic, or what it is. An evaluation is just practice. And the more we do it, the better we get at it, the more comfortable we feel, and it just goes from there. Who else we've got some little bit of time, so who else would like to do it?
I'm happy to give it a go, Suzanne.
All right, Robert, and then Jim, because he had his hand up too. So over to you, Robert.
Thank you, Suzanne. Our speaker today, Michael, delivered an informative and educational presentation about mentoring and coaching, and he brought a number of strengths to the presentation. I particularly liked his use of pace and the way in which he clearly articulated his words, which allowed us to follow his presentation quite smoothly. I liked the word pictures that he was able to create when he talked about the coach running alongside the person that they were coaching. There are a couple of things I'd like Michael to consider for his next presentation that he might like to work on. I felt that the introduction could have been more powerful by opening with a quote or maybe a personal reflection about the difference that coaching has made in his life. I also found that there were occasions when he was using a verbal crutch word of so, and maybe ask the grammarian at his next club meeting to just keep an ear out for that word. Often we don't even know that we're reverting to a specific word, and it can be something that we can easily eliminate once we turn our attention to it. Overall, the strength that I found in Michael's presentation, the strongest part of his presentation was his clear structure, purpose, and call to action. He left us in no doubt that for him, mentoring and actively engaging in the coaching program was the key to success. And he conveyed that enthusiasm and energy to all of us. Michael, I so enjoyed seeing the amount that you have grown and developed from being coached yourself, and share with you the hope that your speech enables others to benefit and grow from the coaching experience. Suzanne.
Thanks very much, Robert. Jim, over to you. You're lucky last.
Okay, thank you, Suzanne, and also a big thank you to Michael. Michael, congratulations on a great speech all about coaching and mentoring. And the one big take that I've got from your speech is how you involved everyone in the audience. And you didn't talk about mentoring as an abstract subject. You talk about it as you, as in our terms of I and you, as you could be a great mentor, or can you pick up the phone, really humanizing the subject so we can really feel like, hey, I can pick up the phone. I can go and do this. It's made it really relatable to us as people, not just as an abstract subject. Also, I really liked the speech structure. How you had a clear introduction, taught us exactly what you were going to talk about, and then at the end, you really summed it up amazingly well with a great call to action. So we have something we can take away from when we leave this speech and go back to our clubs. I just have two little points that you could look into the future. Maybe in the introduction, you could at the end maybe foreshadow your conclusion a little bit, so we are a little bit more aware. Are we going to hear an informative speech? Are we going to hear a persuasive speech? Are we going to hear another type of speech? So maybe just one sentence at the end would cover that. And something to look forward to for the future, a bit of a challenge, would be of how you use Zoom. Because at the moment, you're sitting back, nice and relaxed as I am now. But during the presentation, you're a bit forward and really focus on the speech. So maybe if you could just relax a little bit, sit a bit back, and you've got the whole entire screen to use hand gestures, or it really improves the speech. Just sit back, relax a bit, and the speech will be even better. So overall, I think you had a great speech, you had great speech structure, and you really humanized the speech by directly relating it to us. Just look into your foreshadowing your conclusion and how you use Zoom, and you'll be an even better speaker in the future. Congratulations. Well done, Michael.
Thank you, Jim. Is there anybody who'd just like to comment on any of those evaluations? I mean, obviously we've got a couple of people here who are very experienced evaluators, and that will just come with time and practice. But did anybody have any thoughts on those evaluations?
I don't have it. It's Jill here. I don't have anything else to add, but I enjoyed the evaluations very much. Thanks.
Great.
Yes, it was It was very
Okay.
interesting to see that there were similarities, weren't there? That they all said the same thing, but there was one unique point that each of them said that the other one didn't say. So that's interesting, I think, and that gives us greater learning ability to know the more people we ask, the more people with the more feedback we get. So
Exactly.
but I could clearly see that they followed your wonderful book, Suzanne. It was very
Very
good.
well done.
And I was finding myself saying, so what? So what? So what?
Exactly.
And the so what came, the why came. And I think that if we're always told why and given the reason, we can always apply it. Sometimes we don't understand why we are asked to do things, but if we understand why it's important, I think we remember to do it. Well done, guys. And a good speech, Michael, in the time of 7 minutes 53.
Yeah, that's a really good point, Denise. And that's why I'd also encourage anybody who wants to really pick up your speaking skills is even to be a test speaker in a contest, because then you can have up to 6 evaluators giving you feedback, and you will hear similar feedback, but every speaker will give you something unique that the others don't. And I just think it's a really good way of being able to improve your speaking by doing that. And as you could see here, nobody gave Michael a particularly hard time. I don't think he's going to go away now and say, I'm never going to speak again, because it was helpful and it was supportive and it was positive and it was all those other things that we talked about, what makes an effective evaluation. So now I'll open it up to everybody. Has anybody got any questions? It can be about anything, how to do evaluations, anything about Michael's speech or the evaluators.
I really liked the way that Michael asked for interaction by put up your hand if you've got a mentor. I really felt that you involved us there, Michael, that even if we weren't listening, that got us back. I thought that interaction and asking the question and getting our hands up was very effective. And why that's important is that you included us and made us feel that speech had something for us as well. So I really liked that. I think asking questions, rhetorical questions, and getting a response is very good.
And I quite like the way Michael was able to, he had no idea who the audience was going to be here today. So by saying, who's got a coach, who's got a mentor, and everybody said yes, but then he was able to pivot and say, okay, so you've all got a coach and mentor, but how active is that relationship? And I'm sure he would have had a very different response if none of us had said we had a coach or mentor. So that's another, I think, really important skill when we're trying to be interactive as speakers. If you're going to ask a rhetorical question or ask people to put your hand up, you have to be ready for either everybody to put their hand up or no one.
Yes, I think another really good skill to hook the audience is telling of a personal story. And I thought that Michael's tone and his beautiful, soft, silky feeling, I thought, oh, I'd love to be mentored by you, Michael. I just thought you're very encouraging, very patient. And sometimes when the voice and the tone matches the behaviour that you're trying to predict, I felt that was showed sincerity and authenticity. What I would have liked to have heard was a success story. I would have liked to hear a little story of someone that was, a real success story for you. Give an example of little Suzanne Wacker when she was this little frightened little girl starting, and look at her now being a district champion. I think that stories do resonate with us, and maybe we were thinking of our mentor as well, but try and put in a little story, I think, and that would have broken up the speech.
Suzanne, Deb Barnett has her hand raised for you.
Oh, thank you very much. Yes, Deb.
Yes, I'd just like to go back to the evaluations that we've heard this afternoon, and thank you to each of you for sharing your insights. I really like the use of the structure and I use it myself, the structure of your evaluations, and that is to introduce back to the speaker who they were, to talk about what they said and how they said it, and also to use that summary at the end. I think that you also mentioned it, Suzanne, is that it's just so important, but it's also I find it an easy structure to follow during club meeting time when you're almost on the spot of having to give that evaluation just straight away. And with that, it's just a winner. It means that you can just so easily construct your mini speech with its beginning, opening and conclusion by using what our evaluators have done today.
Yes, thanks, Deb. And you would have noticed too that because they limited their feedback to just a couple of key things, they were all able to delve into it a little bit deeper. So they each had the 2 or 3 positive things and the 2 things to consider for improvement, but they fully analysed it. And you can't do that if you're going to do 10 things, but if you limit it to the 5, then you can go that little bit deeper. And that's why I think, well, hopefully Michael would have got a lot of benefit from that, because they've told him exactly what he needs to do, and including Denise, exactly what he needs to do to make this particular speech even better.
Michael's got his hand up.
Yes, Mr. Nellis. You're on mute. You're on mute.
Suzanne, we've been to quite a few meetings together, and the contrast between our styles is very strong. I've always been impressed by the fact that you've limited the number of things you comment. It must be that I'm more cerebral or something. I always felt that a long list was better. However, it doesn't observe the saying that less is more. Even though I might explain 5 things, it's just too many for people to take in. Right? So picking up, as you do, a couple of really important things, put in a creative and interesting way, leaves a much better long-term impression than a shopping list, even if it's well explained. So that's a statement. But one question I'd like you to consider is, how do you recommend to open an evaluation? How can that be done creatively rather than, I'd like to commend the speaker on presenting an interesting and dynamic speech? So what are some fresh ways of opening an evaluation?
Thanks for the question, Michael. One thing I like to do is actually to try to start with a quote from the speaker's speech. Particularly if it's something like in Michael's case, I probably would have started with something. One of his quotes was the coach who jogs along beside you, but who isn't a battery or something like that. No, coaches aren't an electric charger. I thought that was a really, really powerful quote, and I would have started with that, and then I would have said, Michael's objective is to show us how the difference between coaches and mentors and why we should have one and be one. And I think he achieved that objective because he did these things. So then I would go into this sandwich formula. I would summarize, and then I would try to finish with something really powerful again, rather than thanks for Michael's speech, I'm looking forward to hearing it again. I sometimes say something like, I think that if Michael took into account or included some of his feedback into his speech, he would take it from here up to here. Something like that. Everybody's different. Everybody has a different style. But I try to finish it on something a little bit more interesting than just thank you. And I try to start it with a quote or something else from the speech to demonstrate that I was listening, but also to demonstrate my next points around, well, what was his objective? Did he meet it or not? Does that answer your question?
Just repeating the title is good, because that is like another quote, isn't it?
Yes, exactly right. Exactly right.
Yeah, I think it's important to have a good introduction too, isn't it? And a really good conclusion. And I've often been told, try to finish on a positive, because that's the last thing that the speaker hears. But I always try to have the goal that if you do a good evaluation, the speaker just can't wait to come back and do their next speech because you've inspired and motivated them so much. And but you've got to be authentic, of course, don't you? But, you know, I think everyone has got something so special, and particularly if they've tried. And I was interested to ask you, Suzanne, for some of our icebreakers or some for our newer speakers, they actually read their speech. Of course, we could mention eye contact because you can't have eye contact if you're reading, but would you think you'd concentrate more on the content, or how would you encourage someone who read their speech? Because that does often happen.
Yeah, and I think you've hit the nail on the head there. You're talking about an icebreaker. So for an icebreaker, I would definitely cut them some slack. But I think it's also, I'd also try to offer them some advice on perhaps how they can not use notes in the future. Some people can just go cold turkey. That's it. I'm never going to use notes again. And other people find it too difficult. So in that situation, I wouldn't make it a really big deal, but I would just say something like, I've noticed that you read from it because you had notes. As you get more experience, maybe try to have palm cards where you just put 1 or 2 key points to remind you, or just have one piece of paper on the lectern with just your key points. So it gives them something to aim towards rather than just say, you need to go cold turkey and never use notes ever again, because some people just can't do that.
So in evaluation, most people will bring notes out, would they not? Mostly. What's your opinion on the use of a lectern? Very often you hear people saying, get away from the lectern, you won't be able to see your body language, etc., etc.
Yeah.
I'm interested to know about that. And also, how do you time yourself so you know you're not going to go over time? Do you sort of know how long your intro is going to be and what you need in your conclusion, for example?
Yeah, so I'll take the first point. So you're talking about a lectern for a speaker or the evaluator?
Speaker and the evaluator. Because I often hear people.
Look,
get that away. We want to see you.
Yeah. I personally prefer just to have the lectern well away from me. But one trick I have used, and I've noticed other people use too, is rather than stand behind the lectern, just have the lectern to the side, and that way you can glance at your note if you need to, but you're not standing behind it. You can still move around, and if you've rehearsed it enough, then you should only need to glance over to your notes every now and again rather than read from it. Evaluations are a little bit tougher because they're essentially a impromptu speech with a little bit of preparation. But even then, I think if you use something like the sandwich technique, even when I'm writing my notes, whether it's in a club situation or a contest, I just circle those strengths. So I would have strength 1, vocal variety, strength 2, structure. And that's all I need then as a prompt to know what I'm going to talk about. And it also helps me stay within time because I know now, and again, this comes down to practice. I could not do this the first time I gave an evaluation, but now I know I have a couple of sentences for the intro. I have a couple of sentences for each one of those positive things and recommendations. And I have my summary, and then I have a conclusion. So I know I can fit that within 3 minutes. But it doesn't take much if I'm not careful and I start going off on a tangent, or I start trying to cover too much. That 3 minutes is gone before you even know.
So when you're listening, are we listening with criteria in mind, or are we actually sitting back and enjoying and listening? It's sort of, I believe, an extra strain when you're evaluating and you can't really sit back and just enjoy it because you think, oh my God, I'm supposed to be evaluating this, because sometimes you get so absorbed with the speech. It's fabulous, isn't it? Do you find that you have to really concentrate, and do you just write, and then work out what's most important?
No, I try. You're right. It's hard sometimes to get that balance right. And I've been caught too where the speech is almost over and I think I haven't written anything. But again, with practice, it's just about getting that balance right. So what I'm doing when I'm taking those notes is I'm not writing my evaluation at that point. All I'm doing is writing a quote I particularly like, or just a couple of things that will help me to remember what it was that I particularly liked about that speech. And it'll still be fresh. If you're then trying to write your evaluation within a few minutes after that speech, it'll still be fresh. All you're really trying to do is just take down the key points, because you need to feel the speech. You need to be able to enjoy the speech as a member of the audience, because how can you evaluate the speech if you didn't allow yourself to feel it and experience it? But I'm not going to pretend that it's easy. It's something that has to come with practice.
And not to be frightened of. You've got an opportunity to use it. So, Michael, when you heard the evaluations, what do you do to maximise the opportunity for growth?
Well, I took notes on what the feedback was, and hopefully there's a written evaluation too. So, yeah, they're the things that give you the future direction. And
so, did you have any questions to seek clarification from Judith, Robert, or Jim, or did you quite get it?
There are a couple of things that I thought I could have done better. For instance, I know I speak with a bit of a monotone, right, for a start. And also I felt for a little while there, I sort of lost the plot a little bit, where I just had thought about what was next. So, yeah, so there are a couple of things that came up to mind. I thought the evaluation was worthwhile. Obviously, we all focus on the things we didn't think we did well. So to hear some positives, which is a discipline of evaluation, was worthwhile. One thing I'd like Suzanne or the group to talk about is the no-no of discussing the content of the speech. Right? And I think that still applies. I think it's critical, and it hasn't been mentioned so far, that as an evaluator, your opinion about what they said is irrelevant. And yet people do stray by talking about, I really agree with what you said when you did this. Yeah. I mean, you can give your impressions generally about the fervour of the speaker, but as to waste time on agreeing with their content, or even worse, pretending that you agreed when you hated what they said, is a big no-no and a time waster. So I think the discipline of focusing on presentation is primary. The other thing I think is really important is that to evaluate against the objectives. The purpose of the speech today was to really tell us a bit about yourself as the icebreaker. And I felt I'd like to hear in every evaluation an opinion of, did the speaker meet the objectives? If that's not mentioned, well, I don't think you've really reached step one. That's the critical factor. Did they pass? Did they reach the objectives?
And anyway, if they didn't?
And if they didn't, well, you'd put it in a constructive way. The objectives today were to introduce you as a speaker. And I got some sense of who this person was, but a lot of time was devoted to giving or explaining something. So I felt there could have been a little bit more of opening the heart, telling.
So you could actually say, I don't think anyone actually ever fails, but you could encourage people to say, if you chose to do this speech again, you could have done whatever. And I think that's probably the better way, isn't it?
Yeah, we'd never say you didn't do it. We'd say you made some progress. I felt there was a bit of. However, I felt there could have been more of.
For your next project, you might take the time to more closely have a look at the objectives so that you get the most out of the integrated learning experience and building that form the Toastmasters journey.
Yeah.
And that's why in my personal preference when I'm giving evaluations is actually to mention the objective, because even if they didn't meet the objective, you can still talk about the things that were positive about the speech. And then when you get to the part about talking about improvements, you can focus on the objective there and say, so in order to be able to meet the objective in future, I think maybe you should focus on these things. I will just quickly comment, Jim's got his hands up, but we'll just quickly comment on what Michael was talking about with content. I agree that it's important not to go off on tangents. And I have heard people say, oh, when Michael was talking about his time in the jungle, that reminded me of my story, and off they go. But I still think that the speech structure and the stories that are used within that speech and the content within that speech is important as so far as whether or not it meets the objective. Because if your objective was to motivate somebody, but you were talking about stories that were demotivating, then that's important, I think, to highlight to the speaker.
So what if you get an evaluation that you don't agree with? Do you sit there and go, thank you, thank you, thank you? And then would it be more appropriate then to talk to your evaluator after the speech and get them to explain it? Because you might be just totally missing what was said. And in contrast to that, we're all different, and we can have 2 consecutive evaluators tell us directly opposite. And I think that happens. It could be a bit confusing as well.
Well, that's why I think we have to be careful when we give verbal evaluations that we don't. I try not to talk about the way people pronounce words or anything like that. But what I would do, if I thought the speaker was open to it, is after the speech, I would go up to them and I would say, look, I've just noted, I don't want to embarrass you, but I've just noticed that you pronounce the word this way. It's actually pronounced it that way. So you're still giving them that feedback, but you're just not doing it in an open audience where that person might get quite embarrassed. And I do think it's really important to offer the speaker more information, to actually make the time to go up to the speaker after the evaluation and ask them, do you have any questions? Is there anything I said that you're not clear about? Jim, you've got your hand up. You're on mute, Jim.
My question is, do any of the other participants, Michael, Maury, anybody else, do you have any other feedback you'd like to give, or any other questions?
Jill here. One thing I was going to mention, and it's probably not an issue, the form that we're looking at, the evaluation form that has on it, I think, you excelled at and you may want to work on, and then you can challenge yourself. The idea that you gave about looking at content, well, I think of it as content organisation and delivery, like COD, is, I'm sure, obviously we can all make it fit, but I find a little bit of a slight mismatch when I see the form and they want that, and I think, oh yeah, but I've got my COD hat on. I suppose it's up to individual people to decide how they're going to marry the two together, but do you see one template fitting comfortably over another there with that sort of form that we get given through Pathways?
I think it's important to fill out the form, and I'd be interested to know what other people say. But if you can't, if you've got a piece of evaluation and you're not sure where to make it fit, I would just write it on the back or somewhere, because I still think that it's the feedback we give people that's important, not necessarily where you make it fit. And you don't even have to, if there are things that you don't even want to comment on because you didn't notice them, I think that's okay too. I think it's, if we just concentrate on what feedback is helpful for that speaker, fill out the form or don't fill out the form, I don't think that matters. I think the form's really designed as a prompt. Yep. Because, you know, some people just have no idea of where to start with an evaluation. But I wouldn't worry too much about, oh, I've got this comment, where do I make it fit?
Yes.
Is that what you mean, Jill?
Fine. I would tend to agree, because no matter how much you might say in the spoken evaluation, which fits in the 2 to 3 minutes, anything extra you can provide people with is fantastic, because they've got, you know, more to go on. So
exactly.
Yeah. So yeah, thanks. That's good. Yeah.
Maury, you had a question? I think you might have frozen.
I was just going to share. And the Toastmaster Dell, who used the form, but she was very kind on the back and gave me her notes, in which were, to me, were way more valuable
Exactly.
than the three categories on the front page.
Yeah, exactly.
In other words, I find myself on the lines of coming up with points of
Yeah.
improvement rather than trying to make them.
Yeah, no, I completely agree. Does anybody else have any other questions?
From
Denise?
a VPE or whoever's doing the agenda, what would your recommendations be, Suzanne, as far as who should evaluate a brand new speaker, who should evaluate profile-wise a emerging speaker, and who would be the best to evaluate an experienced speaker?
My personal view is it doesn't really matter too much, although I'd probably suggest for an icebreaker, it's a more experienced evaluator, only because for a lot of people, an icebreaker speech is absolutely terrifying. And you just want to make sure that you get the evaluation right. But again, you might have a very new evaluator who you think is fantastic. So I think it's about picking the evaluator rather than their experience level. But as I also mentioned, even evaluating really experienced speakers, if a new evaluator felt okay about it, I would encourage them to evaluate a new speaker, because often they're coming with a fresh perspective and they're less likely to fall into that trap of talking about eye contact, pausing, and vocal variety that a lot of experienced evaluators fall into the trap of. And I think that evaluating a very experienced speaker, whilst it's more challenging, it helps you learn so much quicker about what works in a speech.
Yeah, that's really good. We know all about it now. You won't be able to shut us up. We want to be on that agenda.
So I hope that next week or whenever your club meetings are, that you sign up to be an evaluator. I find it really rewarding. I don't know about Robert and Jim and Michael who are experienced, but I just find it very rewarding to give an evaluation and have the speaker say, oh, that was really helpful. You actually gave me a very specific evaluation that I can actually go away and do something with it.
Yeah, sometimes those aha moments come out of nowhere.
Yeah.
And it just zings, and people might have been telling you the same thing for so long. I remembered once, and it was very well done, for the use of the stage. So you went from past, present, and future, and you moved it. It was just one step one way and one step the other way. I just thought, oh, that's so fantastic. And then it seemed so basic, but I didn't know. And I think it's those aha moments that are just invaluable.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Michael.
I don't know if I'm negative, but when I started evaluating, the first things that popped out at me were the things I didn't like about the speaker. Spoke too fast, raved on like a lunatic. So what I taught myself was to write those things I didn't like down first. So I always have a page with pluses and minuses on it. So all the things that bugged me, I'd quickly just jot down a word or two to get them off my chest. And then I started looking for things that I liked about the speaker. And then when it came time to present, I just ignore. Well, then it's actually quite constructive. How do I turn those things that I didn't like into the way forward? And once you get a hang of it, it can be quite easy. Right? You know, you can practice that. So instead of, oh, God, you raved on like a lunatic, if you use the pause, I find I'd be able to take your information in a lot better. So, yeah, sometimes that helps clear the deck. Write down the stuff that you hate, put it aside. Even if there's nothing that you like about the speaker, you can actually take something that you didn't like and say, while you spoke at quite a speed, once you start to gain your confidence and slow down, I think you'll be a much more effective, comfortable speaker. So, right, you don't have to, the worst thing you can do is make up lies. We call that whitewashing. I thought it was a fabulous speech and bringing up this stuff that's patently untrue. So I think the best we can do is to take something that wasn't well done at the moment and paint a picture of a better future.
Yeah.
Nothing else, you can always praise their courage for getting up and speaking in front of an audience.
Absolutely.
Exactly right.
Yeah.
Exactly.
You bet. You're
Yeah.
prepared and you're practiced, and I think that's fantastic. And then, try and speak positively about some things that might be better in the future.
Yeah, sometimes humour's a good way of getting around things too, isn't it? You're laughing at yourself or knowing how you felt. So, but there's
What,
Maury.
Maury?
Can I ask a question of the group? We have a new Toastmaster. He's about to be a Toastmaster from Sri Lanka, and he has quite a pronounced accent. And as we know, they can speak at a very quick pace. Sometimes it's hard to understand him. Martin knows him well because Martin's given him a bit of advice. What would be your recommendations for giving feedback when he speaks? He did table topics the other night. He hasn't done his icebreaker yet, but what would be some recommendations?
I think I'd be interested to know what other people think, but I think I wouldn't focus on the accent. I'd focus on the speed, because most likely if he slowed down, then you wouldn't notice the accent as much anyway. And it doesn't matter, even if you are speaking with the accent of the country you currently reside in, if you speak really, really fast, other people won't be able to understand you regardless of what accent you have. So I think in that situation, I would just work on getting him to slow down, pause, all those other things, and then even just with pronunciation, like I mentioned, I wouldn't talk about pronunciation in a group evaluation, but you might be able to pull him aside afterwards and say, look, you've mispronounced that word, and this is how you would pronounce it. But I think if you focus on the speed, that will make a lot of the problems better. Yeah. Jim.
I can say this coming from experience, because that is one of the big issues I had when I started Toastmasters. And the biggest thing that helped me was to get the speaker to also look at, if they write their speech down, to look at the draft they've gotten, put in between paragraphs, in brackets, pause, or have a mark in between a sentence, pause here. So when they're practicing, they can actually see, pause here. And it gives them a visual cue as well as a mental cue to really practice the pausing and get them into it, and help, and also get their mentor to work along with their speech. And when they practice it, to really consider the pauses in between the points as well, so they can integrate that into their structure at the drafting stage, not just at the practicing stage. And that really helped me to get going. Might be something that could help them as well.
Another strategy that I've used is to ask them to speak along with a speech that is being delivered by somebody that is delivering it in an appropriate pace, such as there might be a scene from a television show or a movie that they've got on DVD where a character is delivering a soliloquy. And by doing that and getting an understanding of the pace at which that is effectively being delivered allows them to adapt and tailor their presentation to be delivering at that pace.
So, Robert, you're suggesting doing sentence for sentence?
The strategy that I would use with that particular person is suggesting that if they've got a favourite movie or they've seen a speech by a presenter that they thought was really empowering or moving, that they simply watch it again and again, and particularly if it has subtitles, it's even more effective, and then just read the subtitles and read along with the speech at the speed that it was originally delivered, so that they can get comfortable with how to adapt their pace to the presentation that they want to be.
That's a really good idea.
And with that final comment, I would like to officially close the meeting. And firstly, I'd like to thank Suzanne for giving up her time today. Fantastic.
Thank you, Suzanne.
Thank you.
Thank you.
It's been great.
Secondly, I'd like to thank Michael for his excellent speech and feedback as well.
Thanks, Michael.
Thirdly,
And we'd like to be able to present this, Jim, at the Goal Setters meeting, thanking Suzanne and Michael with the Thanks a Million cards. And we'll try and get Robert's signature on there as well. We really do appreciate your time, and I've got a page full of notes here. Thank you, Jim.
I'd also like to thank Denise. Without her help and support, these sessions wouldn't happen.
And you're welcome.
Thanks, Denise.
And fourthly, to the audience, without you, these things don't happen either. So thank you very much. And finally, I will stop the recording now.